Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back. Not just a few centuries or even millennia, but 5.2 million years into the past. We're heading to a world that would challenge everything you think you know about survival, about what it means to be human, and about the incredible journey that led to you sitting here right now. If you're enjoying these deep dives into our ancient past, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button or even subscribe. It genuinely helps, more than you know. And I'm always curious about where you all are tuning in from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. I love seeing our global community come together through these stories. Now dim those lights, maybe put on some background noise, and let's travel together to a time when the very concept of humanity was just beginning to flicker into existence. We're going to explore how our earliest ancestors didn't just survive in one of Earth's most challenging environments, they conquered it. And trust me, their story will change how you see your own. Picture this. You've just woken up 5.2 million years ago in what we now call the East African Rift Valley. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, everything around you is trying to change that. You're not quite human, not quite ape, but something entirely new. Something that shouldn't exist according to the rules of evolution up to this point. You're an early hominid, and you're about to face the greatest environmental challenge in mammalian history. The world you've awakened to bears almost no resemblance to the Africa you might imagine today. This isn't the endless savannah of nature documentaries. This is something far more complex, far more dangerous, and infinitely more demanding. The climate is shifting, the forests are retreating, and vast grasslands are spreading like a green ocean across the continent. Your ancestors lived in trees. You're about to learn how to master the ground. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight of this new world, it's the sound. Gone are the familiar rustles and calls of the dense forest canopy. Instead, there's an overwhelming symphony of grass moving in the wind, the distant thunder of hoofbeats from massive herds, and something else. Something that makes your newly evolved spine straighten with alertness. It's the sound of opportunity mixed with mortal danger. Standing upright for the first time in your lineage's history, you're getting your first glimpse of what will become humanity's greatest innovation. Not fire, not tools, not language, but the simple act of standing tall and seeing farther than any ground-dwelling primate ever had before. Your eyes scan the horizon, taking in a landscape that stretches beyond comprehension. Rolling grasslands dotted with acacia trees, distant mountains that seem to touch the sky, and everywhere, life in forms and quantities that boggle the mind. But here's what makes this moment so extraordinary. You're not just witnessing the birth of the savannah. You're witnessing the birth of intelligence as we know it. The environmental pressures that created this grassland world didn't just change the landscape. They changed the very trajectory of evolution itself, creating selective pressures so intense, so specific, that they would forge the cognitive abilities that eventually led to art, science, philosophy, and the video you're watching right now. The transformation happening around you is staggering in its scope. Over the past few million years, the Earth's climate has been cooling and drying. The vast tropical forests that once covered much of Africa are fragmenting, breaking apart like a giant green puzzle being disassembled by time and weather. In their place, something unprecedented is emerging. Grasslands, savannas, open country that demands entirely new survival strategies. Your immediate ancestors, creatures like Ardipithecus, lived primarily in woodland environments. They moved through trees with ease, their long arms and curved fingers perfectly adapted for a life spent swinging from branch to branch. But those forests are disappearing, and with them, the old ways of life. The trees that once provided safety, food, and shelter are becoming islands in an ocean of grass. And you, standing here at the dawn of a new evolutionary era, must learn to navigate this transformed world or perish. The challenges are immediate and overwhelming. In the forest, food was abundant and relatively easy to find. Fruits, leaves, insects, small animals, all within easy reach of a skilled climber. But out here on the grassland, resources are scattered, seasonal, and fiercely competed for. You're looking at a landscape where survival requires not just physical adaptation, but cognitive innovation, on a scale never before seen in the natural world. The predators alone should terrify you. This isn't the modern African savanna with its relatively modest complement of large carnivores. This is the Pliocene, a time when the continent crawled with predatory species that would make today's lions and leopards look like house cats. Massive saber-toothed cats the size of small horses patrol these grasslands. Giant hyenas with bone-crushing jaws hunt in coordinated packs, and lurking in the tall grass are predators so specialized for hunting early hominids that paleontologists call them the stuff of nightmares. But here's the remarkable thing. Instead of being driven to extinction by these challenges, your species is about to do something unprecedented. You're going to adapt, not just physically, though the physical adaptations are extraordinary. Your pelvis is reshaping itself to allow for more efficient upright walking. Your hands are becoming more dexterous, capable of precise manipulation. Your brain is beginning to grow, slowly but inexorably, developing new neural pathways that will eventually give rise to abstract thought. More importantly, you're developing behavioral adaptations that will revolutionize life on Earth. You're learning to cooperate in ways that go far beyond anything seen in other primates. You're beginning to share food systematically, to plan for the future, to communicate about things that aren't immediately present. You're developing what anthropologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other individuals have thoughts, intentions, and knowledge different from your own. The grassland world you're entering is teaching you lessons that will echo through millions of years of human development. Lesson 1. Information is survival. In the forest, you could rely on instinct and immediate sensory input. Out here, you need to remember where water sources are located, when different plants bear fruit, which areas are frequented by predators, and how weather patterns affect resource availability. Your brain is becoming a survival computer, processing and storing environmental data with unprecedented sophistication. Lesson 2. Cooperation multiplies individual capabilities exponentially. A single early hominid on the savannah is vulnerable prey, but a group of early hominids working together, sharing information, and coordinating their actions becomes a formidable force. You're learning to hunt collectively, to share the cognitive burden of environmental awareness, and to specialize in different survival skills while remaining part of an integrated social unit. Lesson 3. Adaptability trumps specialization. The forest demanded specific physical adaptations. The savannah demands cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch strategies, to learn new techniques, to adapt behavior to changing circumstances. You're developing what will become humanity's greatest asset, the capacity to thrive in virtually any environment through behavioral rather than purely physical adaptation. The daily reality of your life would challenge every assumption modern humans make about survival. Water, that fundamental necessity we take for granted, requires constant attention. The scattered water sources of the savannah are often seasonal, sometimes dangerous to approach, and always contested by other species. You're learning to read the landscape for signs of water, to remember the location of distant sources, and to plan your movements around this most precious resource. Food gathering has become an intellectual exercise. Different plants provide nutrition at different times of the year. Some require processing to be edible. Others are toxic unless prepared correctly. You're developing an encyclopedic knowledge of your environment, learning to predict resource availability, and beginning to modify natural objects to help you access food sources. The cognitive demands are staggering, requiring memory, planning, and problem-solving abilities that far exceed those of your forest-dwelling ancestors. And then there's the predator problem. Living in open country means you're visible to threats from vast distances, but it also means you can see them coming. You're learning to use your upright posture as an early warning system, scanning the horizon constantly for signs of danger. More importantly, you're learning to think like a predator, to understand their hunting patterns, their preferred prey, their strengths and weaknesses. This is where the real cognitive revolution begins. You're not just reacting to your environment anymore. You're modeling it mentally. You're running scenarios in your head, predicting outcomes, and planning responses to situations that haven't happened yet. The grassland is forcing you to develop imagination as a survival tool. The social implications are equally profound. Forest-dwelling primates typically live in small, relatively simple social groups. But the demands of savanna life are creating pressure for larger, more complex social organizations. You need more eyes to watch for predators, more hands to gather scattered resources, more minds to process environmental information. You're developing the foundations of human society, learning to live in groups large enough to be effective, but structured enough to avoid constant conflict. Communication is evolving rapidly. The simple calls and gestures that sufficed in the forest are proving inadequate for the complex coordination required on the grassland. You're beginning to develop more sophisticated signaling systems, ways to convey detailed information about distant resources, specific threats, and complex plans. The foundations of language are being laid, not through some sudden evolutionary leap, but through the relentless pressure of environmental demand. But perhaps most remarkably, you're beginning to modify your environment rather than simply adapting to it. The use of tools, while still rudimentary, is becoming more systematic. Stones for cracking nuts and bones, sticks for digging roots and defending against predators. The first tentative steps toward the technological revolution that will eventually transform the planet. The landscape around you is vast and unforgiving, but it's also rich with possibility. Herds of antelope stretch to the horizon, their movements creating opportunities for scavenging and eventually hunting. The scattered acacia trees provide not just shade and occasional fruit, but vantage points for surveillance and emergency refuge. The seasonal rivers carve corridors of abundance through the grassland, creating temporary oases that support concentrated populations of both prey and predators. Your species is learning to read this landscape like a book, understanding its rhythms and patterns, its dangers and opportunities. You're developing what ecologists call landscape literacy, the ability to extract survival-relevant information from environmental cues. The angle of shadows tells you the time of day. The behavior of distant animals signals the presence of predators. The color and movement of grass indicates wind patterns that could carry scent or sound. This is more than survival. This is the birth of human consciousness as we understand it. The demands of savanna life are creating selective pressures for cognitive abilities that go far beyond anything required for simple survival. Abstract thinking, long-term planning, complex social coordination, technological innovation, all emerging from the fundamental challenge of staying alive in an environment that rewards intelligence above all other traits. The nights on this ancient savanna are unlike anything your forest ancestors ever experienced. When darkness falls, it falls completely. No canopy to filter moonlight, no familiar tree hollows for shelter, just endless grassland stretching in every direction, alive with sounds that make your newly evolved nervous system fire with alertness. This is when the real predators emerge. And this is when your species begins to develop something that will define humanity forever. The ability to think beyond the immediate moment. You huddle with your group around the dying embers of lightning-struck trees, one of the few sources of fire in this world. But you're not just seeking warmth and protection. You're learning. Your brain is processing the day's events, storing information, making connections between cause and effect that span hours, days, even seasons. The cognitive work happening in your skull right now is laying the groundwork for every human achievement that will follow. The social dynamics around these nighttime gatherings are extraordinary. You're not just a collection of individuals seeking mutual protection. You're becoming something unprecedented in the natural world, a collective intelligence. Information flows between group members in increasingly sophisticated ways. The individual who spotted a pride of saber-toothed cats near the eastern waterhole shares that knowledge. The one who discovered a new grove of fruit-bearing trees maps out the route for others. The collective memory of your group is becoming far more powerful than any individual memory could be. But here's where it gets really interesting. You're beginning to develop what anthropologists call cultural transmission. The knowledge you're gaining isn't dying with you. It's being passed on, refined, expanded by the next generation. Your offspring don't have to rediscover everything from scratch. They inherit not just your genes, but your accumulated wisdom about this challenging environment. And they build on it, creating an exponential growth in collective knowledge that will eventually reshape the entire planet. The hunting strategies developing within your group represent a quantum leap in cognitive evolution. You're not just chasing prey opportunistically anymore. You're planning complex, coordinated hunts that require understanding the behavior patterns of multiple species, predicting their movements, and coordinating the actions of numerous group members across time and space. Some individuals serve as spotters, positioned at strategic points to monitor herd movements. Others act as drivers, using fire and noise to channel prey toward predetermined locations. Still others wait in ambush, their timing coordinated through increasingly sophisticated communication systems. These hunts require something that no other species had ever developed: the ability to think from multiple perspectives simultaneously. You need to understand not just your own role in the hunt, but the roles of your companions, the likely responses of the prey, and the potential reactions of competing predators who might try to steal your kill. You're developing what psychologists call recursive thinking, the ability to think about thinking about thinking. It's a cognitive ability so complex that even modern children don't fully develop it until they're several years old. The scavenging opportunities on the Savannah are teaching you lessons about timing, risk assessment, and resource competition that go far beyond simple opportunism. When a pride of giant cats brings down a massive antelope, you don't just rush in hoping for scraps. You watch, you analyze. You assess the mood of the predators, the size of the kill, the presence of other scavengers, the terrain around the carcass. You're learning to calculate complex probability matrices in your head, weighing potential rewards against multiple categories of risk. Sometimes you wait hours for the right moment to approach. Sometimes you create distractions to draw predators away from their kill. Sometimes you work cooperatively with other scavenger species, using their abilities to complement your own. You're developing strategic thinking that involves modeling the behavior of multiple actors across extended time periods. The cognitive demands are staggering, but they're forging mental capabilities that will eventually produce mathematics, chess, and space exploration. The tool use emerging within your species represents another revolutionary development. You're not just using objects as tools anymore. You're modifying them systematically to improve their effectiveness. Stones are being shaped to create better cutting edges. Sticks are being sharpened and hardened in fire. You're beginning to create composite tools, combining different materials to achieve specific functional goals. More importantly, you're developing what archaeologists call technological foresight. You're not just making tools when you need them, you're making them in advance, carrying them with you, and even caching them at strategic locations for future use. This requires an unprecedented level of planning ability, the capacity to envision future scenarios and prepare for them systematically. The environmental pressures shaping your evolution are creating feedback loops that accelerate cognitive development. The better your group becomes at environmental problem solving, the more complex challenges you're able to tackle. Success in one domain opens up possibilities in others. Your improved hunting abilities allow you to access higher quality nutrition, which supports brain growth, which enables more sophisticated hunting strategies, which provides even better nutrition, and so on. Your diet is undergoing a transformation that directly fuels this cognitive revolution. The high-quality proteins and fats you're obtaining through systematic hunting and scavenging provide the metabolic foundation for brain expansion. But it's not just about calories. You're learning to process foods in ways that maximize their nutritional value. Bone marrow extraction techniques that unlock concentrated fats. Root processing methods that neutralize toxins and improve digestibility. Food sharing systems that ensure optimal nutrition for developing brains across the group. The seasonal rhythms of Savannah life are teaching you about time in ways that forest existence never could. In the forest, resources were relatively constant throughout the year. On the grassland, everything depends on seasonal patterns. You're learning to think temporally, to understand cause and effect relationships that span months or even years. The decisions you make during the wet season affect your survival chances during the dry season. The locations where you choose to forage today determine what resources will be available at those sites next year. This temporal thinking is revolutionary. You're developing the cognitive foundations for agriculture, urban planning, and scientific prediction. You're learning to live not just in the present moment, but across extended time horizons that encompass past experience and future possibilities. The challenges of raising offspring in this environment are driving innovations in social organization that prefigure human cultural complexity. Children require extended care and education to survive on the savannah. Unlike forest environments, where youngsters could learn survival skills relatively quickly through imitation, grassland life demands systematic knowledge transmission. You're developing teaching behaviors, ways to deliberately transmit complex information to the next generation. These teaching relationships are creating new social roles and hierarchies based on knowledge rather than just physical dominance. The individuals who possess the most comprehensive environmental knowledge become crucial resources for group survival. You're seeing the emergence of what anthropologists call prestige hierarchies, social rankings based on competence and contribution rather than aggression and intimidation. The mating strategies evolving within your species reflect the cognitive demands of savannah life. Successful reproduction requires not just physical fitness, but demonstrated ability to navigate environmental challenges. Partners are being selected based on their problem-solving abilities, their environmental knowledge, and their capacity for cooperation and resource sharing. You're seeing the emergence of sexual selection pressures that favor intelligence, creating a feedback loop that accelerates cognitive evolution. The territorial behaviors developing in your group are far more sophisticated than simple resource defense. You're learning to manage landscape-scale territories that encompass multiple resource types across seasonal cycles. This requires understanding ecological relationships, predicting resource availability, and negotiating complex relationships with neighboring groups. You're developing the cognitive foundations for diplomacy, trade, and territorial governance. Water management is becoming an increasingly sophisticated aspect of your survival strategy. You're not just finding water sources anymore. You're learning to predict their seasonal availability, to modify them for improved access, and to defend them strategically. Some individuals are becoming specialists in hydrology, developing detailed knowledge about watershed patterns, underground flows, and seasonal precipitation cycles. The fire management skills emerging within your group represent another technological breakthrough. You're learning to maintain fires for extended periods, to transport fire across landscapes, and to use fire as a tool for environmental modification. controlled burning is beginning to reshape local ecosystems, creating grassland mosaics that support higher prey densities and more predictable resource distributions. But perhaps most remarkably, you're beginning to develop what we might call environmental empathy. You're learning to understand the savanna not as a hostile force to be conquered, but as a complex system to be understood and worked with. You're developing intuitive insights into ecological relationships, understanding how the behavior of one species affects others, how seasonal changes cascade through food webs, how your own actions influence environmental conditions. This ecological intelligence is revolutionary. It represents a fundamental shift from reactive survival to proactive environmental management. You're not just adapting to the savanna anymore. You're learning to adapt the savanna to your needs while maintaining its essential productivity. It's the beginning of the relationship between humans and nature that will eventually produce agriculture, conservation, and environmental science. The communication systems developing within your group are becoming increasingly sophisticated. You're not just signaling about immediate threats and opportunities anymore. You're sharing complex information about distant events, abstract concepts, and hypothetical scenarios. The vocalizations, gestures, and facial expressions you're using are becoming more standardized, more systematic, more capable of conveying precise meanings. This communication revolution is enabling new forms of collective problem solving. Multiple individuals can now contribute different pieces of information to environmental puzzles, creating composite understanding that exceeds what any individual could achieve alone. You're developing the foundations of human language, driven not by some mysterious innate capacity, but by the relentless pressure of environmental challenges that reward communication efficiency. The leadership patterns emerging within your group reflect the cognitive demands of savanna survival. Leaders aren't just the physically strongest anymore. They're the individuals who consistently make good decisions under pressure, who can coordinate complex group activities, who possess the most comprehensive environmental knowledge. You're seeing the emergence of intellectual leadership, social roles based on mental rather than purely physical capabilities. As you stand here in this ancient grassland, watching the sun set over endless rolling plains, you're witnessing something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. You're seeing intelligence emerge as an evolutionary strategy, not the simple problem-solving abilities found in many species, but complex, abstract, recursive intelligence capable of modeling reality, predicting outcomes, and modifying environments. The savanna isn't just changing your body, it's creating your mind. The transformation happening inside your skull is as dramatic as anything occurring in the landscape around you. Your brain is literally rewiring itself, creating new neural pathways that will define human consciousness for millions of years to come. The prefrontal cortex, that region responsible for planning and abstract thought, is expanding at an unprecedented rate. But this isn't just biological change happening in isolation. It's environmental pressure sculpting cognition in real time. Every challenge you face on this ancient savanna is teaching your species lessons about reality that no forest-dwelling ancestor ever needed to learn. When you track a herd of antelope across 20 miles of grassland, remembering their preferred routes, their watering schedules, their response patterns to different types of threats, you're developing what neuroscientists would eventually call spatial temporal reasoning. Your brain is creating three-dimensional maps of vast territories, overlaying them with time-based predictions about resource availability and danger zones. But here's what makes this cognitive revolution so extraordinary. You're not just developing these mental capabilities for yourself, you're learning to share them, to combine individual insights into collective intelligence that transcends anything the natural world has ever produced. When your group gathers around those precious fires at night, you're not just staying warm, you're engaging in humanity's first think tanks, pooling mental resources to solve environmental problems that no individual mind could tackle alone. The memory systems developing in your species are nothing short of revolutionary. Forest life demanded good short-term memory and quick reflexes. Savannah life demands something entirely different: the ability to store, organize, and retrieve vast quantities of environmental information across extended time periods. You're learning to remember not just where things are, but when they'll be there, under what conditions they'll be available, and how they relate to dozens of other environmental variables. Your group is developing what anthropologists call distributed cognition. Different individuals are specializing in different types of environmental knowledge. One becomes an expert tracker, capable of reading animal sign with forensic precision. Another develops encyclopedic knowledge of plant resources, understanding seasonal cycles, nutritional values, and processing requirements for hundreds of species. Still, another becomes a weather predictor, reading atmospheric signs to forecast seasonal changes that could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The social implications of this cognitive specialization are staggering. You're creating the first knowledge-based economy in Earth's history. Individuals gain status and resources not through physical dominance, but through their contributions to collective problem-solving. The tracker who can follow prey for days becomes invaluable to the group. The plant expert who knows which roots are edible during drought becomes a lifeline for survival. The weather reader who can predict seasonal changes gives the group crucial advantages in planning and preparation. This knowledge economy is driving innovations in social cooperation that go far beyond anything seen in other species. You're developing systems of reciprocity, ways to ensure that knowledge sharers receive appropriate benefits for their contributions. You're creating the first primitive forms of what economists would eventually call intellectual property, understood agreements about who gets to benefit from specific types of environmental knowledge. The hunting strategies your species is developing represent a quantum leap in collective intelligence. Modern pack hunters like wolves coordinate their actions through instinct and immediate communication. You're doing something far more sophisticated. You're planning hunts that unfold over days or even weeks, involving complex logistics, multiple contingency plans, and coordination between groups that may be separated by vast distances. These extended hunts require unprecedented levels of abstract thinking. You need to model not just the behavior of your prey, but the likely responses of competing predators, the effects of weather on animal movements, the availability of water sources along potential migration routes, and the coordination requirements for your own group members. You're essentially running complex simulations in your head, testing different scenarios before committing to specific strategies. The scavenging opportunities on the savannah are teaching your species about risk assessment and probability calculation in ways that reshape cognitive architecture. When you approach a predator's kill, you're not just making a simple go or no-go decision. You're calculating complex probability matrices, weighing multiple categories of risk against various types of potential reward, factoring in variables like predator species, time since the kill, weather conditions, escape routes, and the presence of other scavengers. These calculations require what mathematicians would eventually call multivariate analysis, the ability to process multiple variables simultaneously and understand their interactive effects. You're developing mental capabilities that won't be formally recognized by science for millions of years, driven purely by the survival demands of grassland life. The tool-making revolution happening within your species represents another cognitive breakthrough. You're not just using found objects as tools anymore. You're engaging in what archaeologists call operational sequence thinking, the ability to envision a series of modifications that will transform raw materials into functional implements. When you pick up a stone, you can already see the hand axe it could become, understanding the precise sequence of strikes required to achieve that transformation. This forward-thinking approach to tool creation requires extraordinary spatial reasoning abilities. You need to understand three-dimensional relationships, predict how forces will propagate through materials, and maintain focus on long-term goals while executing precise short-term actions. You're developing the cognitive foundations for engineering, architecture, and industrial design. The seasonal rhythms of savanna life are creating the first truly temporal thinkers in evolutionary history. Unlike forest environments where resources remain relatively stable throughout the year, grassland life is defined by dramatic seasonal variations. You're learning to think across timescales that span months and years, understanding cause and effect relationships that unfold slowly but inexorably. This temporal thinking is revolutionary in its implications. You're developing the ability to delay gratification, to invest current effort in future benefits, to make decisions based on predicted rather than immediate outcomes. When you choose not to consume certain plant foods during abundance, instead allowing them to reproduce and expand their populations for future harvests, you're engaging in the first primitive forms of resource management and agricultural thinking. The child-rearing practices evolving within your group reflect the increasing complexity of environmental knowledge required for savanna survival. Forest-dwelling primates could learn most survival skills through simple imitation and trial and error. Your offspring require systematic education, deliberate knowledge transmission that can take years to complete. You're developing the first teaching behaviors in evolutionary history, ways to deliberately share complex information with developing minds. This isn't just showing young individuals what to do. You're learning to explain why certain behaviors are necessary, how environmental systems work, and what consequences follow from different choices. You're creating the foundations of human education, driven by the sheer complexity of grassland survival requirements. These teaching relationships are creating new social bonds that go beyond simple kinship ties. The individuals who become skilled teachers gain status and influence within the group, creating incentives for knowledge development and sharing. You're seeing the emergence of mentor-student relationships, social structures based on cognitive rather than purely genetic connections. The mating strategies developing within your species reflect the premium that savanna life places on intelligence and problem-solving ability. Physical strength and aggression, while still important, are no longer the primary determinants of reproductive success. Partners are increasingly selected based on their demonstrated ability to navigate environmental challenges, their knowledge of resource locations, and their capacity for cooperation and innovation. This shift in sexual selection pressures creates powerful feedback loops for cognitive evolution. The individuals who develop superior environmental intelligence have better access to mates and resources, passing both their genes and their knowledge to the next generation. Intelligence becomes not just a survival tool, but a reproductive advantage, accelerating the pace of cognitive evolution. The territorial behaviors emerging within your group are far more sophisticated than simple resource defense. You're learning to manage landscape-scale territories that encompass multiple habitat types, seasonal resource cycles, and complex relationships with neighboring groups. This requires understanding ecological principles, predicting environmental changes, and negotiating intricate social agreements. Your territory isn't just a piece of land anymore. It's a complex system that you actively manage and modify to improve its productivity. You're using controlled burning to maintain optimal grassland conditions. You're protecting key resource areas during vulnerable periods. You're even engaging in primitive forms of habitat restoration, encouraging the growth of useful plant species and discouraging competitors. The water management strategies your group is developing represent another technological breakthrough. You're not just locating existing water sources anymore. You're learning to predict their seasonal availability, to modify them for improved access, and to create new water sources through environmental manipulation. Some individuals are becoming specialists in hydrology, developing detailed knowledge about groundwater patterns, seasonal precipitation cycles, and the relationship between vegetation and water retention. This specialized knowledge is becoming a form of social capital, earning these individuals status and resources within the group. The fire management techniques emerging within your species represent a fundamental shift in the relationship between organisms and their environment. You're not just using fire defensively anymore. You're learning to employ it as a tool for landscape modification, creating grassland mosaics that support higher prey densities and more predictable resource distributions. This controlled use of fire requires extraordinary planning abilities and environmental understanding. You need to predict wind patterns, understand fuel loads, anticipate the responses of different plant and animal species, and coordinate the activities of multiple group members across extended time periods. You're engaging in the first primitive forms of ecosystem management. The communication revolution happening within your group is enabling new forms of collective problem solving that transcend individual cognitive limitations. You're developing ways to share not just simple information about immediate threats and opportunities, but complex insights about environmental relationships, abstract concepts, and hypothetical scenarios. These communication advances are creating exponential increases in collective intelligence. When multiple individuals can contribute different pieces of information to environmental puzzles, the group's problem-solving capacity becomes far greater than the sum of its individual parts. You're developing the foundations of human language, driven by the relentless pressure of survival challenges that reward communication, efficiency, and precision. The leadership structures evolving within your group reflect the cognitive demands of Savannah life. Authority is increasingly based on demonstrated competence rather than physical dominance. The individuals who consistently make good decisions under pressure, who can coordinate complex group activities, and who possess comprehensive environmental knowledge become natural leaders. This meritocratic approach to leadership creates incentives for cognitive development and knowledge acquisition. Individuals compete not just through aggression and intimidation, but through the demonstration of intellectual capabilities. You're seeing the emergence of what anthropologists call prestige competition, social rivalry based on competence and contribution rather than dominance and fear. The problem-solving strategies developing within your species represent a fundamental shift from reactive to proactive thinking. Instead of simply responding to environmental challenges as they arise, you're learning to anticipate problems and develop solutions before they become critical. This forward-thinking approach requires unprecedented levels of abstract reasoning and strategic planning. When you observe changes in animal behavior patterns, you don't just note them passively. You actively analyze what these changes might mean for future resource availability, predator activity, and group safety. You're developing the cognitive foundations for scientific thinking, learning to identify patterns, form hypotheses, and test predictions through systematic observation. The resource management practices emerging within your group represent another revolutionary development. You're learning to think beyond immediate consumption, considering the long-term consequences of current resource use patterns. When you discover a productive foraging area, you don't simply exploit it to exhaustion. You develop sustainable harvesting strategies that maintain productivity over time. This conservation thinking requires extraordinary temporal reasoning abilities. You need to understand ecological relationships that unfold over seasons and years, predict the consequences of different management strategies, and coordinate group behavior to implement long-term plans. You're developing the cognitive foundations for agriculture, forestry, and environmental stewardship. The technological innovations emerging within your species are becoming increasingly sophisticated, reflecting growing understanding of material properties and engineering principles. You're not just modifying individual tools anymore. You're developing systematic approaches to technology, understanding how different materials can be combined to achieve specific functional goals. The composite tools you're creating require unprecedented levels of planning and spatial reasoning. When you have to add a stone blade to a wooden handle, you need to understand stress distributions, material compatibility, and the biomechanics of tool use. You're developing the cognitive foundations for materials science and mechanical engineering. As darkness falls over this ancient grassland, and you gather with your group around the flickering flames, something extraordinary is happening. You're not just surviving in one of Earth's most challenging environments, you're thriving in it, transforming it, and in the process, transforming yourselves into something the world has never seen before. The cognitive revolution happening inside your skull is creating capabilities that will eventually produce art, music, mathematics, philosophy, and science. But right now, in this moment 5.2 million years ago, you're focused on something far more immediate and infinitely more important. You're learning to be human. And tomorrow, as the sun rises over these endless grasslands, you'll continue that extraordinary journey of discovery, innovation, and transformation that leads, ultimately, to you. The morning light reveals something your forest ancestors never had to contemplate. Choice. Endless, overwhelming choice. Every direction you could walk leads to different opportunities, different risks, different futures. The vast openness of the savannah isn't just changing your body or even your mind. It's fundamentally altering your relationship with possibility itself. Your group stands at what will become one of the most crucial decision points in evolutionary history. 3 major river valleys stretch out before you, each offering different resources, different challenges, different paths forward. The northern valley shows signs of seasonal flooding, creating rich wetlands teeming with waterfowl and aquatic plants. The eastern route follows higher ground, offering better visibility, but exposing you to the full fury of seasonal storms. The southern passage winds through scattered woodlands, familiar territory that echoes your ancestral forests, but lacks the abundant game of open grassland. This isn't just a question of which way to walk today. The decision your group makes here will influence where your descendants live, what they eat, how they develop, even what they eventually become. You're standing at an evolutionary crossroads, and the cognitive machinery developing in your skull is about to make one of the most consequential choices in the history of life on Earth. The discussion happening within your group reveals just how sophisticated your communication systems have become. This isn't the simple dominance display of forest primates, where the strongest individual makes unilateral decisions. You're engaging in something unprecedented, collective reasoning about future scenarios none of you have experienced directly. Different individuals contribute different pieces of information, different perspectives, different insights about potential outcomes. The eldest member of your group, a grizzled survivor, whose scarred hands tell stories of decades navigating savannah dangers, shares memories of similar terrain from years past. A younger individual with exceptional tracking abilities describes the animal signs visible in each direction. The group's plant specialist analyzes the vegetation patterns, predicting seasonal resource availability. Someone else, gifted with an intuitive understanding of weather patterns, reads the sky and offers insights about seasonal rainfall. What's happening here is revolutionary. You're creating humanity's first strategic planning session, pooling individual knowledge to address challenges that exceed any single mind's capacity to solve. The cognitive load is distributed across multiple brains, each contributing specialized knowledge while participating in a collective decision-making process that will determine the group's survival prospects. But here's what makes this moment so extraordinary. You're not just planning for immediate survival, you're thinking generationally. The choices you make today will affect not just your own chances of reaching tomorrow, but the developmental environment your children will grow up in, the challenges they'll face, the opportunities they'll have to continue this extraordinary cognitive evolution. The Northern Valley calls to you with its promise of abundant water and rich feeding grounds. The seasonal floods that create these wetlands also support massive concentrations of wildlife. Herds of ancient elephants, troops of early horses, flocks of giant ground birds, all drawn by the reliable water and lush vegetation. For a species learning to hunt cooperatively, these concentrated prey populations offer unprecedented opportunities. But the challenges are equally daunting. Wetland environments harbor diseases unknown in drier regions. The seasonal flooding that creates abundance also creates periods of scarcity, when water levels drop and prey animals disperse. Predators, too, are drawn to these rich feeding grounds. The Northern Valley supports populations of saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and crocodilian species that would make modern Nile crocodiles look like house pets. The group member advocating for the northern route paints a compelling picture of abundance, but also acknowledges the risks. Their argument reveals something remarkable happening in your species' cognitive development. You're learning to think probabilistically, weighing potential benefits against various categories of risk, considering multiple possible outcomes rather than simply reacting to immediate circumstances. The eastern route presents entirely different challenges and opportunities. The higher elevation offers commanding views of the surrounding landscape, providing early warning of approaching storms, predator movements, and migrating herds. The rock outcroppings scattered across this terrain provide natural shelters and tool-making materials. The exposed position also creates opportunities for long-distance signaling, allowing communication between widely separated groups. But elevation comes with costs. The eastern route exposes you to the full force of seasonal weather patterns. The storms that sweep across these highlands can be devastating, bringing hail, lightning, and flash floods that turn dry creek beds into torrents within minutes. Water sources are scattered and unreliable. The sparse vegetation offers limited food resources, making your group more dependent on hunting success. The advocate for the eastern route emphasizes the strategic advantages of high ground, the defensive benefits of rock shelters, the superior tool-making materials available in the stone outcroppings. Their argument reveals another aspect of your species' developing intelligence: the ability to think tactically, considering not just immediate resource needs, but long-term strategic positioning. The Southern Passage offers the comfort of familiarity, terrain that echoes your ancestral forest environment. The scattered woodlands provide traditional food sources, familiar shelter options, and reduced exposure to the extreme weather patterns that characterize open grassland. The predator populations are smaller and more predictable. The risks are known quantities, challenges your species has successfully navigated for generations. But familiarity comes with its own dangers. The southern route offers fewer opportunities for the kind of cognitive challenges that have been driving your species' rapid mental development. The scattered resources and smaller game populations provide less incentive for the complex cooperative behaviors that have been revolutionizing your social organization. Choosing the southern route might mean survival, but it could also mean evolutionary stagnation. The group member arguing for the Southern Passage emphasizes safety and certainty, the wisdom of building on proven survival strategies rather than risking everything on unknown challenges. Their perspective reveals yet another dimension of your developing intelligence: the capacity for conservative risk assessment, the ability to value stability and proven success over potential but uncertain gains. As the debate continues, something remarkable becomes clear. Your group isn't just choosing a travel route, you're choosing an evolutionary trajectory. The decision you make here will determine what kinds of environmental pressures your species faces, what kinds of cognitive challenges drive your continued development, what kinds of social structures emerge to meet those challenges. The Northern Valley, with its concentrated resources and intense competition, would accelerate the development of sophisticated hunting strategies, complex social coordination, and advanced tool technologies. Your descendants might become the master hunters of the ancient world, developing cognitive abilities optimized for tracking, predicting, and coordinating complex group activities. The Eastern Highlands, with their strategic advantages and harsh conditions, would drive the development of different cognitive specializations. Your descendants might become the great navigators and weather readers, developing extraordinary spatial reasoning abilities and environmental prediction skills. The harsh conditions would also accelerate technological innovation, as survival would depend on creating increasingly sophisticated tools and shelters. The southern woodlands would encourage a different kind of development, emphasizing the cognitive abilities needed to extract maximum value from familiar but limited resources. Your descendants might become the great botanical experts, developing encyclopedic knowledge of plant resources, processing techniques, and ecological relationships. But here's the truly remarkable thing happening as your group debates these options. You're not just considering the immediate practical implications of each choice. You're beginning to understand that decisions have consequences that cascade through time, affecting not just your own survival, but the developmental trajectory of your entire lineage. This understanding represents another cognitive breakthrough. You're developing what philosophers would eventually call moral reasoning, the ability to consider the broader implications of your choices, to think beyond immediate self-interest toward the welfare of the group and future generations. It's a form of abstract thinking that goes far beyond anything required for simple survival. The debate reveals the emergence of different personality types within your group, different cognitive styles that approach problems from different angles. Some individuals are natural optimists, drawn to opportunities and possibilities. Others are more cautious, focused on identifying and avoiding potential dangers. Still others are pragmatists, seeking practical compromises that balance risks and benefits. These different approaches to decision-making are creating a form of cognitive diversity that strengthens your group's problem-solving capacity. When facing complex challenges with uncertain outcomes, having multiple perspectives increases the likelihood of identifying optimal solutions. Your species is learning that intellectual diversity is a survival advantage, that groups benefit from including individuals with different thinking styles and different areas of expertise. The discussion also reveals the emergence of leadership based on expertise rather than dominance. The individual with the most relevant knowledge about each potential route becomes the focal point for that part of the debate, regardless of their position in traditional dominance hierarchies. You're seeing the birth of what anthropologists call situational leadership, where authority shifts based on competence and context, rather than fixed social rankings. As the sun climbs higher and the debate continues, your group is engaged in something that no species in Earth's history has ever attempted: collective reasoning about abstract future scenarios. You're not just sharing information about immediate conditions. You're constructing mental models of different possible futures, analyzing the potential consequences of different choices, and attempting to select the option most likely to produce favorable long-term outcomes. The cognitive demands are staggering. Each individual must maintain mental models of 3 different environmental scenarios, each with multiple variables and potential outcomes. They must integrate their own specialized knowledge with information provided by others. They must weigh immediate costs against long-term benefits. They must consider not just their own welfare, but the welfare of the entire group, including individuals who aren't yet born. But perhaps most remarkably, your group is learning to disagree constructively. Forest-dwelling primates typically resolve disputes through dominance displays and physical confrontation. Your group is developing something entirely different: the ability to maintain social cohesion while exploring different ideas, to express disagreement without triggering aggressive responses, to change opinions based on new information without losing social status. This capacity for constructive disagreement is revolutionary. It means that your group's decision-making process can actually improve over time, as individuals learn from experience and modify their thinking based on outcomes. You're developing the foundations of scientific thinking, the ability to test ideas against evidence and modify beliefs accordingly. The individual advocating for the northern route begins incorporating new information provided by others, acknowledging the disease risks while arguing that the abundant game populations would provide enough protein to support larger group sizes, which could offset individual health risks through improved collective security. They're demonstrating what cognitive scientists would eventually call integrative thinking, the ability to synthesize different types of information into coherent strategic frameworks. The supporter of the Eastern route responds by refining their argument, acknowledging the harsh conditions, while emphasizing the long-term strategic advantages. They point out that the superior visibility and defensive positions would allow smaller groups to monitor larger territories, potentially providing access to the resources of multiple valleys while maintaining secure base camps. They're demonstrating what military strategists would eventually call force multiplication, the ability to achieve greater effects through superior positioning and intelligence. The advocate for the Southern Passage adapts their argument as well, emphasizing not just safety, but sustainability. They argue that the familiar environment would allow the group to develop deeper expertise in proven survival strategies, creating a stable foundation for gradual expansion into more challenging territories. They're demonstrating what economists would eventually call comparative advantage, the benefits of specializing in areas where you have existing strengths. As the debate evolves, something extraordinary becomes apparent. Your group isn't just choosing between three routes. You're inventing the concept of strategic planning itself. You're developing cognitive frameworks for analyzing complex decisions that will eventually produce business planning, military strategy, urban design, and scientific methodology. The discussion reveals another remarkable development: the emergence of scenario planning. Different individuals begin describing detailed sequences of events that might unfold in each valley. These aren't just simple predictions. They're complex narratives that account for seasonal changes, predator behavior, resource availability, weather patterns, and group dynamics across extended time periods. These mental scenarios require extraordinary cognitive sophistication. Each individual must maintain awareness of multiple interacting variables, predict how changes in one factor might affect others, and construct coherent narratives about potential futures that none of them have experienced directly. They're developing the cognitive foundations for systems thinking, the ability to understand complex relationships and predict emergent properties of complex systems. The quality of these scenarios is remarkable. The Northern Valley scenario includes detailed descriptions of seasonal flooding patterns, predictions about animal migration timing, analyses of predator competition around water sources, and assessments of disease transmission risks in high-density populations. The Eastern Highlands scenario incorporates weather pattern analysis, terrain-based tactical considerations, seasonal resource availability predictions, and long-term strategic positioning assessments. The Southern Woodlands scenario demonstrates equally sophisticated thinking, with detailed analyses of carrying capacity limitations, sustainable harvesting strategies, gradual territorial expansion possibilities, and risk mitigation approaches. Each scenario represents a level of environmental modeling that wouldn't be formally recognized by science for millions of years. But what makes these scenarios truly extraordinary is their interactive quality. As different individuals contribute information and insights, the scenarios evolve and become more sophisticated. The group's collective intelligence is producing analyses that exceed what any individual could generate alone. You're witnessing the birth of collaborative intelligence, the ability to combine individual cognitive resources to tackle challenges that transcend individual limitations. The debate also reveals the emergence of what psychologists would eventually call perspective taking, the ability to understand situations from multiple viewpoints. Individuals begin considering how their choices might affect different members of the group differently. The elderly individuals who might struggle with the physical demands of the Eastern Highlands, the pregnant females who need reliable nutrition and safe shelter, the young individuals whose development could be shaped by the cognitive challenges they encounter. This perspective-taking ability represents another cognitive breakthrough. You're learning to model not just environmental systems, but social systems. You're developing the ability to understand how individual welfare relates to group welfare, how different choices might affect different individuals differently, how group decisions should account for the needs and capabilities of all members. The discussion becomes increasingly sophisticated as individuals begin considering second-order and third-order effects of their choices. If the group chooses the Northern Valley and encounters disease outbreaks, how might that affect their relationships with neighboring groups? If they choose the Eastern Highlands and develop superior tool-making capabilities, how might that change their competitive position relative to other populations? If they choose the Southern Woodlands and achieve stable population growth, how might that eventually lead to territorial conflicts? These considerations require unprecedented levels of abstract thinking. You're learning to trace causal chains across multiple steps, to understand how current decisions might influence future options, to consider the broader systemic implications of local choices. You're developing the cognitive foundations for political thinking, economic planning, and social policy. As the sun reaches its zenith and the debate continues, your group faces a moment of truth. The decision can't be postponed indefinitely. Resources are limited, weather patterns are changing, and other groups might claim the most desirable territories if your group delays too long. The time for analysis is ending. The time for commitment is beginning. But even as the pressure mounts to reach a decision, your group continues to demonstrate remarkable cognitive sophistication. Instead of defaulting to simple majority rule or dominance-based decision-making, you're developing more nuanced approaches to collective choice. Some individuals who initially supported one option begin expressing willingness to accept alternatives based on the arguments they've heard. Others suggest hybrid strategies that might capture benefits from multiple approaches. The emerging solution reveals another aspect of your species' developing intelligence, the ability to think creatively about complex problems, to generate novel solutions that weren't initially apparent. Instead of simply choosing one of the three obvious routes, your group begins considering more sophisticated strategies that might combine elements from different approaches. Perhaps the group could split temporarily, with different subgroups exploring different valleys before reconvening to share information and make more informed decisions. Perhaps they could establish seasonal movement patterns that take advantage of different resources at different times of year. Perhaps they could develop trading relationships with groups that choose different territories, creating networks of mutual support that reduce the risks associated with any single choice. These creative solutions require extraordinary cognitive flexibility. You're learning to think beyond the obvious options, to generate novel approaches to complex problems, to synthesize different ideas into innovative strategies. You're developing the foundations of entrepreneurial thinking, the ability to identify opportunities that others miss and create value through novel combinations of existing resources. The decision-making process itself is becoming a form of education, teaching your group how to approach complex choices more effectively. Individuals who initially approach the problem from narrow perspectives are learning to consider broader implications. Those who focus primarily on immediate concerns are learning to think more strategically about long-term consequences. This learning process represents another cognitive breakthrough. You're not just making a single decision about travel routes. You're developing decision-making capabilities that will serve your group in countless future situations. You're learning to learn, developing metacognitive abilities that improve your problem-solving effectiveness over time. As shadows begin to lengthen and the decision point approaches, your group stands at the threshold of something unprecedented in evolutionary history. You're about to make a conscious, collective choice about your species' future direction, based on abstract reasoning about potential outcomes. No other species has ever attempted anything so cognitively demanding, so far removed from immediate survival pressures, so focused on long-term strategic considerations. The choice you make will echo through millions of years of human development. But more importantly, the process you're using to make that choice is creating cognitive capabilities that will eventually reshape the entire planet. You're learning to think collectively about complex problems, to integrate different types of knowledge, to plan strategically for uncertain futures, and to make decisions based on abstract reasoning rather than immediate impulses. Tomorrow, as you begin your journey toward whichever destination your group chooses, you'll be carrying more than just your possessions and your accumulated environmental knowledge. You'll be carrying the cognitive tools that will eventually produce civilization itself. And the Savannah, vast and challenging and infinitely demanding, will continue to teach you lessons about intelligence, cooperation, and the extraordinary potential that emerges when minds learn to work together toward common goals. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly as your group finally reaches consensus, but the decision-making process has revealed something even more significant than which route to take. You've discovered that your species possesses something no other organism in Earth's history has ever developed: the ability to consciously direct your own evolutionary trajectory through collective reasoning and strategic choice. The decision your group has reached represents more than just a travel route. It's a testament to something revolutionary happening inside your collective consciousness. You've chosen the Northern Valley, not because it's the safest option, but because the cognitive challenges it presents will accelerate your species development in ways none of you can fully comprehend yet. But as you prepare for this journey, something unexpected happens. The youngest member of your group, barely past adolescence, approaches the elder who had advocated for the southern woodlands. In forest-dwelling societies, such an interaction would be impossible. Youth deferred to age through simple dominance hierarchies. But here on the Savannah, something different is emerging. The young individual isn't challenging the elder's wisdom. Instead, they're offering a gift. During the long debate, they've been quietly working on something, using the tool-making techniques they've observed, but adding innovations no adult had considered. In their hands is a composite tool unlike anything your species has created before. A wooden shaft, carefully selected and shaped, fitted with not one but multiple stone implements. A spear point for hunting, a cutting edge for processing, and a digging tool for accessing roots. This isn't just technological innovation, it's the emergence of what anthropologists would eventually call cumulative culture. The young individual has taken existing knowledge and built upon it, creating something genuinely new. But more remarkably, they're sharing this innovation freely with the group, understanding intuitively that individual advancement serves collective survival. The elder examines the composite tool with growing amazement. Their weathered hands trace the careful bindings, test the balance, assess the functionality of each component. Then something extraordinary happens. Instead of claiming the innovation as their own right as the group's senior member, they begin asking questions. How did you achieve this binding strength? What made you think to combine multiple functions? Where did you find materials with these specific properties? This exchange represents another cognitive breakthrough. You're witnessing the birth of systematic knowledge transfer, the deliberate sharing of technical innovations across generations. But it's not flowing in the traditional direction from old to young. Instead, innovation is emerging from the intersection of youthful creativity and accumulated experience, creating a feedback loop that accelerates technological development. The implications ripple through your group immediately. Other individuals begin examining their own tools with new eyes, considering modifications and improvements. The plant specialist starts experimenting with different binding materials. The tracker begins designing implements optimized for their specific needs. You're witnessing the emergence of what economists would eventually call innovation culture, a social environment that actively encourages and rewards creative problem solving. But the technological revolution is just the beginning. As your group prepares for the journey to the Northern Valley, you're developing logistical capabilities that dwarf anything seen in other species. The planning process involves not just deciding what to carry, but optimizing load distribution, creating redundant systems for critical resources, and establishing protocols for resource sharing during the journey. The individuals with the strongest backs aren't automatically assigned the heaviest loads. Instead, carrying capacity is distributed based on a complex algorithm that your group processes intuitively, considering individual strength, specialized knowledge, mobility requirements, and group dynamics. The tracker needs to remain nimble for scouting activities. The plant specialist requires access to processing tools. The eldest members carry lighter loads, but serve as repositories of crucial environmental knowledge. This optimization process reveals another aspect of your developing intelligence. You're learning to think systematically about resource allocation, considering multiple variables simultaneously to achieve optimal outcomes. The cognitive demands are staggering, requiring each individual to understand not just their own needs and capabilities, but how their role fits into the larger group strategy. The water management strategy your group develops for the journey represents another leap forward in planning sophistication. You're not just carrying enough water to reach the next known source. You're creating contingency plans for multiple scenarios, establishing protocols for water rationing, identifying potential emergency sources along the route, and developing methods for improving water quality during the journey. Some individuals are assigned to carry specialized containers made from prepared animal organs. Others transport materials for constructing water collection systems from morning dew or rare rainfall. The group even develops signaling systems for communicating about water availability across distances, ensuring that scattered foraging parties can coordinate their movements around this most critical resource. The food provisioning strategy is equally sophisticated. Instead of simply gathering whatever is immediately available, your group engages in complex nutritional planning that considers protein requirements, carbohydrate needs, essential nutrients, and the specific demands of long-distance travel. Different individuals specialize in procuring different types of food resources, creating a diversified nutritional portfolio that reduces the risk of deficiency-related health problems. But perhaps most remarkably, you're developing what modern nutritionists would call functional food processing. The plant specialist isn't just gathering edible materials, they're modifying them to improve nutritional density, digestibility, and storage life. Fermentation techniques that concentrate nutrients, drying methods that preserve seasonal abundance, combination strategies that enhance the bioavailability of essential compounds. These food processing innovations require extraordinary biochemical intuition. Without any formal understanding of nutrition science, your group is learning to optimize dietary intake through trial and error experimentation, guided by careful observation of physiological responses. You're developing the cognitive foundations for agriculture, cuisine, and preventive medicine. The social organization emerging for the journey reveals another dimension of your species' cognitive evolution. Leadership roles are becoming increasingly fluid and context-dependent. The eldest member leads discussions about long-term strategy. The tracker takes charge during movement phases. The plant specialist directs foraging activities. The toolmaker organizes equipment maintenance. This distributed leadership model requires unprecedented social intelligence. Each individual must understand when to lead, when to follow, and when to contribute specialized expertise to collective decision-making. You're developing what organizational psychologists would eventually call collaborative leadership, the ability to share authority based on competence and context rather than fixed hierarchies. The communication systems developing within your group are becoming increasingly sophisticated as you prepare for the challenges ahead. You're not just sharing immediate information anymore. You're developing ways to convey complex concepts about future scenarios, abstract relationships, and hypothetical situations. The vocalizations, gestures, and facial expressions you're using are becoming more standardized, more precise, more capable of carrying detailed meaning. But more importantly, you're learning to communicate about communication itself. When misunderstandings arise during planning discussions, individuals don't just repeat their messages more loudly. They actively analyze why the communication failed and develop better ways to convey their intended meaning. You're developing metalinguistic abilities, the capacity to think about language while using it. The emotional preparation for the journey reveals another aspect of your developing psychological sophistication. Forest-dwelling primates face challenges as they arise, relying primarily on immediate emotional responses to guide behavior. Your group is doing something entirely different. You're emotionally rehearsing for future challenges, preparing psychological responses to situations you haven't yet encountered. This emotional forecasting requires extraordinary mental sophistication. You need to imagine how you might feel in various future scenarios. Consider how those emotions might affect your decision-making, and develop strategies for managing psychological responses under stress. You're developing the foundations of emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and regulate emotional responses for optimal performance. The risk assessment strategies your group employs while planning the journey reveal another cognitive breakthrough. You're not just identifying potential dangers, you're categorizing them by type, probability, and potential impact. Physical threats from predators, environmental hazards from weather and terrain, social risks from encounters with other groups, resource challenges from food and water scarcity. For each category of risk, you're developing specific mitigation strategies, predator avoidance techniques based on behavioral analysis, weather prediction methods based on atmospheric observation, diplomatic protocols for intergroup encounters, resource conservation strategies based on efficiency optimization. You're thinking like modern risk management professionals, creating comprehensive response frameworks for complex, uncertain situations. The contingency planning process reveals yet another dimension of your cognitive development. You're not just preparing for the most likely scenarios, you're developing response strategies for low probability, high impact events. What if someone becomes seriously injured? What if you encounter hostile groups? What if key resources prove unavailable? What if weather patterns change dramatically? These contingency plans require extraordinary abstract thinking. You need to imagine specific failure modes, consider their cascading effects, and develop response strategies that account for degraded capabilities and limited options. You're learning to think several moves ahead, like chess masters planning complex sequences of moves and counter-moves. The departure ceremony your group conducts before leaving for the Northern Valley represents another breakthrough in symbolic thinking. This isn't just a practical gathering to review plans and check equipment. It's a ritual that serves multiple psychological and social functions simultaneously. The ceremony helps individual group members process the emotional significance of the journey, transforming anxiety about unknown challenges into excitement about new opportunities. It reinforces social bonds and collective identity, creating shared commitment to group welfare over individual interests. It serves as a final review of plans and procedures, ensuring everyone understands their roles and responsibilities. But most remarkably, the ceremony creates what anthropologists would call collective effervescence, a shared emotional state that enhances group cohesion and individual performance. Through synchronized activities, shared vocalizations, and coordinated movements, your group is generating a form of social energy that will sustain motivation and cooperation throughout the challenging journey ahead. As the ceremony concludes and your group begins moving toward the Northern Valley, you're carrying more than just tools and provisions. You're carrying cognitive capabilities that represent millions of years of evolutionary innovation compressed into the span of a few generations. The environmental pressures of Savannah life have accelerated your mental development at a pace unprecedented in natural history. The first few hours of travel reveal immediately why the northern route will accelerate your species' cognitive development. The terrain is constantly changing, requiring continuous adaptation of movement strategies. Stream crossings demand engineering solutions, Rocky outcroppings require climbing techniques. Thorny vegetation necessitates route modifications. Every few hundred yards presents new challenges that test your group's problem-solving abilities. But these challenges are also opportunities. Each obstacle overcome adds to your group's collective knowledge base. The stream crossing techniques you develop will serve you at countless future water barriers. The climbing strategies you learn will prove valuable in rocky terrain throughout your range. The route-finding methods you perfect will guide countless future journeys. The tracking challenges presented by the Northern Route are unlike anything your group has encountered before. The diverse terrain creates complex sign preservation patterns. Soft mud near streams holds clear prints, but hardens quickly in sun. Rocky surfaces show few traces, but reveal subtle scratches to trained eyes. Grassland areas preserve movement patterns, but require sophisticated interpretation techniques. Your group's tracker is developing abilities that transcend simple observation. They're learning to read landscapes like books, interpreting subtle environmental cues to reconstruct complex sequences of events. The direction of bent grass reveals passage routes. The distribution of disturbed insects indicates timing. The spacing of tracks suggests behavioral states and social dynamics. But more importantly, the tracker is beginning to share these skills systematically with other group members. This knowledge transfer isn't happening through simple imitation anymore. It's occurring through deliberate instruction, with the tracker actively directing attention to specific features, explaining their significance, and testing comprehension through guided practice. The plant resources encountered along the Northern Route are testing your group's botanical knowledge in unprecedented ways. The diverse habitats create opportunities to encounter species unknown in your traditional range. Some are clearly edible, others obviously dangerous, but many fall into ambiguous categories that require careful evaluation. Your group's plant specialist is developing systematic approaches to evaluating unfamiliar species, physical examination techniques that assess toxicity risk, small-scale testing protocols that minimize danger while gathering information, preparation methods that might neutralize harmful compounds. You're witnessing the birth of experimental botany, the systematic investigation of plant properties through controlled observation and testing. The hunting opportunities presented by the Northern Route are beyond anything your group has previously imagined. The concentrated wildlife populations around seasonal wetlands create target-rich environments that reward sophisticated hunting strategies. But the abundance also creates unprecedented challenges in terms of competition with other predators and optimal prey selection. Your group is learning to hunt selectively, choosing targets based not just on immediate availability, but on complex strategic considerations. Nutritional value per unit of effort expended, risk levels associated with different prey species, impacts on local ecosystem balance, storage and processing requirements for different types of meat. These hunting decisions require what modern economists would call optimization analysis, the ability to evaluate multiple variables simultaneously to achieve optimal outcomes. You're developing mathematical thinking without formal mathematics, solving complex resource allocation problems through intuitive calculation. The water management challenges of the Northern Route are forcing innovations that will revolutionize your relationship with this critical resource. The seasonal wetlands create periods of abundance followed by scarcity, requiring sophisticated storage and conservation strategies. But they also create opportunities to develop new water procurement techniques. Your group is learning to construct temporary reservoirs that capture and store seasonal abundance, excavation techniques that create depression storage, lining methods that reduce seepage losses, purification strategies that improve water quality. You're developing the technological foundations for water engineering and resource management. The social challenges presented by the Northern Route are equally demanding. The rich resources attract not just prey species, but other hominin groups, creating opportunities for both cooperation and conflict. Your group must navigate complex intergroup dynamics while maintaining internal cohesion and achieving survival objectives. These social encounters are teaching you lessons about diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict resolution that will prove crucial for your species' future development. How to signal peaceful intentions. How to establish communication with groups that speak different dialects. How to negotiate resource sharing agreements. How to de-escalate potentially violent confrontations. The psychological challenges of the northern route are testing your group's emotional resilience in unprecedented ways. The abundance creates excitement, but also anxiety about sustainability. The competition generates stress, but also motivation for innovation. The social encounters produce both opportunities for alliance and risks of conflict. Your group is developing what modern psychologists would call emotional regulation strategies, techniques for managing psychological responses to optimize performance under challenging conditions. Breathing techniques that reduce anxiety. Visualization methods that prepare for difficult scenarios. Social support systems that maintain morale during stressful periods. As evening approaches and your group makes camp in this rich but dangerous landscape, you're processing experiences that are literally rewiring your brains. The cognitive demands of the day have created new neural pathways, strengthened existing connections, and enhanced the overall processing capacity of your mental systems. The campfire discussions tonight will be unlike anything your forest ancestors ever experienced. You'll be sharing not just information about immediate conditions, but complex analyses of strategic opportunities, detailed assessments of risk factors, and sophisticated plans for future activities. You'll be engaging in humanity's most advanced form of collective intelligence, combining individual insights into group understanding that exceeds the sum of its parts. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons about what it means to be a Northern Valley is teaching you that survival isn't just intelligent species in a complex world. About avoiding death. It's about thriving in environments that reward innovation, cooperation, and strategic thinking. You're not just conquering the savannah anymore. You're being conquered by it, transformed by its demands into something the world has never seen before. Something that will eventually spread across continents, develop technologies that reshape entire ecosystems, and ask questions about the nature of existence itself. But tonight, as you gather around the fire and share the day's discoveries, you're simply a group of early hominids learning to be human. And tomorrow, as the sun rises over the wetlands of the Northern Valley, you'll continue that extraordinary journey of discovery that leads, through millions of years of challenge and innovation, directly to the moment you find yourself in right now. The morning mist rises from the wetlands like ghostly fingers reaching toward a sky that promises both opportunity and danger. Your group stirs from sleep in this Northern Valley, and immediately you understand why this environment will become humanity's greatest teacher. The sounds alone tell a story no forest ever whispered. The thunderous calls of massive groundbirds echo across the water. The splash of ancient hippos mingles with the haunting cries of saber-toothed cats in the distance. And beneath it all, the constant rustle of life, millions of creatures navigating the same survival challenges that will forge your species into something unprecedented. Your sleep was fitful, not because of physical discomfort, but because your brain couldn't stop processing yesterday's discoveries. The neural pathways carved by new experiences continue firing throughout the night, consolidating memories, making connections, preparing for today's challenges. You're developing what neuroscientists would eventually call sleep-dependent learning, where your unconscious mind continues working on problems even when your conscious attention rests. The dreams that filled your night were unlike anything your ancestors ever experienced. Instead of simple replays of daily events, your sleeping mind constructed complex scenarios about future possibilities. You dreamed of hunting strategies that haven't been attempted yet, of tool innovations that could solve problems you've only begun to understand, of social alliances that might emerge from encounters with neighboring groups. This nocturnal creativity represents another cognitive revolution. Your brain is learning to use downtime productively, processing information and generating solutions when survival pressures temporarily ease. You're developing the foundations of what researchers would eventually call divergent thinking, the ability to generate novel solutions by combining existing knowledge in innovative ways. The first challenge of the day emerges before you've fully awakened. During the night, a family of ancient elephants has moved through your camp area, leaving behind a landscape of massive footprints filled with standing water. What initially appears to be a simple inconvenience quickly reveals itself as an opportunity for learning about ecological relationships that will revolutionize your understanding of environmental systems. Your group's tracker approaches these water-filled depressions with the systematic curiosity that's becoming characteristic of your species. Instead of simply noting the elephant's passage, they begin analyzing the complex ecological story these footprints tell. Different insects have already colonized the temporary pools. Small fish may have been transported from nearby wetlands. The disturbed soil has exposed roots and seeds that weren't previously accessible. But the tracker isn't working alone anymore. Other group members contribute their specialized knowledge to this environmental analysis. The plant specialist identifies the newly exposed vegetation and assesses its nutritional potential. The water expert evaluates the quality and sustainability of these temporary pools. The social coordinator considers how this information might be valuable for negotiations with other groups. This collaborative analysis reveals something extraordinary about your species' developing intelligence. You're not just gathering information anymore. You're creating knowledge through collective investigation, combining different types of expertise to understand ecological relationships that no individual could comprehend alone. You're developing the foundations of scientific method, learning to ask systematic questions about how natural systems function. The breakfast routine that emerges in this new environment demonstrates another leap forward in technological sophistication. The abundant but diverse food resources of the wetlands require processing techniques that go far beyond anything your forest ancestors ever developed. Different plant species need different preparation methods. Various animal products require specific preservation approaches. The sheer variety of available resources demands systematic organization and planning. Your group develops what modern food scientists would recognize as batch processing protocols, systematic approaches to preparing multiple food types simultaneously for maximum efficiency. Some individuals focus on plant preparation, using the new composite tools to process roots, stems, and seeds with unprecedented effectiveness. Others specialize in animal product processing, developing techniques for preserving meat and extracting nutrients from bones and organs. But the real innovation lies in the integration of these different processing streams. Your group learns to coordinate timing so that different food preparation activities complement each other. The heat generated by meat cooking can be used for plant processing. The tools used for plant cutting can be cleaned and repurposed for animal processing. The waste products from one process become inputs for another. This systems thinking approach to food preparation requires extraordinary planning abilities and operational coordination. Each individual must understand not just their own tasks, but how their activities fit into the larger food preparation system. You're developing the cognitive foundations for manufacturing processes, learning to optimize complex, multi-step operations for maximum efficiency and output quality. The water procurement strategies your group develops in the wetlands environment represent another technological breakthrough. The seasonal abundance creates opportunities to experiment with water collection and storage techniques that would be impossible in more arid environments. But the diversity of available water sources also creates new challenges in terms of quality assessment and purification. Your group discovers that different water sources in the wetlands have different properties. Some are crystal clear but taste strange. Others appear muddy but prove refreshing. Some support abundant aquatic life, while others seem lifeless despite appearing clean. You're learning to evaluate water quality through systematic observation and testing, developing the intuitive chemistry knowledge that will eventually produce formal water treatment technologies. The purification techniques your group develops are remarkable in their sophistication. Filtration systems using layers of different materials, settling procedures that allow suspended particles to separate naturally, even primitive distillation methods that use solar heating to separate pure water from contaminated sources. You're developing the technological foundations for water engineering and public health. But perhaps most importantly, you're learning to think about water as a system rather than just a resource. You begin understanding how water moves through the landscape, how it interacts with different geological formations, how it supports different types of life. This ecological thinking will eventually produce watershed management, aquifer protection, and sustainable water use practices. The hunting challenges presented by the wetlands environment are unlike anything your species has previously encountered. The concentrated wildlife populations create target-rich environments, but they also create unprecedented complexity in terms of species selection, hunting strategies, and resource processing. Your group must navigate not just the mechanics of bringing down prey, but the strategic considerations of which species to target and when. The decision-making process that emerges around hunting reveals another aspect of your cognitive development. You're not just choosing targets based on immediate opportunity anymore. You're engaging in complex strategic analysis that considers multiple variables simultaneously. The nutritional value of different prey species, the effort required to successfully hunt each type, the processing demands and storage possibilities, the impact on local ecosystem balance. These hunting decisions require what modern operations researchers would call multi-criteria optimization, the ability to balance multiple competing objectives to achieve optimal outcomes. You're developing mathematical thinking without formal mathematics, solving complex resource allocation problems through intuitive analysis of trade-offs and relationships. The cooperative hunting strategies your group develops in the wetlands represent a quantum leap in social coordination. The diverse terrain and concentrated prey populations create opportunities for hunting techniques that require unprecedented levels of planning and coordination. Some hunts involve dozens of individuals working together across hours or even days, coordinating their actions through increasingly sophisticated communication systems. These complex hunts require what military strategists would eventually call operational planning, the ability to coordinate multiple units toward common objectives while maintaining flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. Different individuals serve specialized roles within the overall hunting strategy. Scouts gather intelligence about prey movements and predator activities. Drivers use controlled fires and coordinated movements to channel prey toward predetermined locations. Ambush teams position themselves at strategic points along predicted routes. The coordination demands are staggering. Each individual must understand not just their own role, but how their actions affect the success of other team members and the overall hunt outcome. They must maintain communication across significant distances while remaining concealed from prey species. They must adapt their tactics in real time as conditions change and opportunities shift. But perhaps most remarkably, these complex hunts are teaching your group about leadership and authority in ways that will revolutionize your social organization. Traditional dominance hierarchies prove inadequate for coordinating complex multi-phase operations. Instead, leadership becomes situational and expertise-based. The individual with the best knowledge of prey behavior leads the planning phase. The most skilled tracker guides the intelligence gathering. The most experienced hunter coordinates the final attack. This distributed leadership model requires extraordinary social intelligence from all participants. Each individual must know when to lead, when to follow, and when to contribute specialized expertise to collective decision-making. You're developing what organizational psychologists would eventually call collaborative authority, the ability to share power based on competence and context rather than fixed social rankings. The tool innovations emerging from wetlands hunting represent another technological revolution. The diverse hunting challenges require specialized implements for different prey species and hunting strategies. Lightweight spears for long-distance throws, heavy clubs for close combat, composite tools that combine multiple functions for versatility. Your group is learning to match tool design to specific functional requirements with engineering precision. But the real breakthrough lies in your approach to tool standardization and production. Instead of each individual crafting their own implements according to personal preferences, your group begins developing standardized designs that optimize performance while allowing for mass production. Specific techniques for shaping spear points, standardized methods for hafting stone blades to wooden handles, quality control procedures that ensure consistent tool performance. This standardization process requires abstract thinking about the relationship between form and function. You need to identify the essential characteristics that make tools effective, distinguish them from incidental features that don't affect performance, and develop production methods that reliably reproduce the essential elements. You're developing the cognitive foundations for manufacturing and quality control. The processing challenges presented by wetlands hunting are equally demanding. The diversity of prey species requires different butchering techniques, preservation methods, and nutritional optimization strategies. But the abundance also creates opportunities for specialization and efficiency improvements that wouldn't be possible with smaller, less frequent kills. Your group develops what modern food scientists would recognize as value stream optimization, systematic approaches to extracting maximum nutritional value from hunting success. Nothing is wasted. Meat provides immediate protein needs. Bones become tools and marrow sources. Hides become containers and clothing materials. Even organs are processed for specialized nutritional requirements. But the real innovation lies in your group's approach to preservation and storage. The wetlands environment provides materials and conditions for food preservation techniques that extend the value of hunting success across time. Salt deposits for meat curing, clay materials for container construction, natural refrigeration in cool, shaded areas. You're developing the technological foundations for food security and resource management. The social implications of successful wetlands hunting are equally profound. The abundance created by effective hunting strategies supports larger group sizes and more complex social organization. But managing increased resources and larger populations requires new forms of social coordination and conflict resolution that challenge traditional group dynamics. Your group begins developing what anthropologists would call resource distribution protocols, systematic approaches to sharing hunting success that maintain group cohesion while rewarding individual contributions. These systems aren't based on simple equality or traditional dominance hierarchies. Instead, they reflect complex calculations about individual effort, skill contribution, group needs, and long-term relationship maintenance. The distribution decisions require sophisticated social intelligence and mathematical thinking. You need to assess individual contributions that may have occurred at different times and in different forms. You need to balance immediate nutritional needs against long-term relationship management. You need to consider how current distribution decisions will affect future cooperation and group dynamics. The tracking and navigation challenges presented by the wetlands environment are pushing your cognitive abilities in entirely new directions. The complex terrain creates navigation problems that can't be solved through simple landmark recognition. Water levels change seasonally, altering the landscape dramatically. Vegetation grows and dies back, transforming familiar areas into unrecognizable terrain. Animal trails shift as resource availability changes. Your group's navigation specialists are developing what modern cartographers would recognize as dynamic mapping abilities. the capacity to maintain accurate mental representations of landscapes that change over time. These mental maps aren't static pictures, but dynamic models that account for seasonal variations, weather impacts, and long-term ecological changes. The navigation techniques emerging from these challenges require unprecedented spatial reasoning abilities. You're learning to navigate using abstract reference systems rather than just visible landmarks. Solar positions that indicate direction and time. Star patterns that provide nighttime navigation guidance. Wind patterns that reveal seasonal weather systems. You're developing the cognitive foundations for astronomy, meteorology, and geographic sciences. But perhaps most remarkably, your group is learning to share and combine individual navigation knowledge into collective spatial intelligence that exceeds what any individual could achieve alone. Different individuals contribute different types of spatial information. The plant specialist knows seasonal vegetation patterns. The animal tracker understands migration routes and territorial boundaries. The weather reader can predict how seasonal changes will affect landscape features. This collaborative navigation requires sophisticated communication about abstract spatial relationships. You need ways to describe locations that aren't currently visible, routes that extend beyond immediate experience, and relationships between distant landmarks. You're developing the linguistic foundations for geographic description and spatial reasoning that will eventually produce maps, surveys, and navigation technologies. The predator management strategies your group develops in the wetlands represent another leap forward in environmental intelligence. The rich resources that attract prey species also draw predators in unprecedented numbers and varieties. Your group must learn to coexist with saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, crocodilian species, and predatory birds while maintaining access to the resources that make this environment so attractive. The predator avoidance techniques you develop require sophisticated understanding of animal behavior and ecological relationships. Different predator species hunt at different times, use different strategies, and respond differently to human activities. You're learning to model these behavioral patterns and predict predator activities with remarkable accuracy. But you're not just avoiding predators anymore. You're learning to manipulate predator behavior to your advantage. Controlled fires that drive dangerous species away from desired areas. Noise-making techniques that signal territorial occupation. Strategic timing of activities to avoid peak predator hunting periods. You're developing the foundations of wildlife management and ecological manipulation. The defensive strategies your group creates for wetlands living represent another technological innovation. The open terrain and abundant resources make traditional hiding ineffective. Instead, your group must develop active defense systems that provide protection while maintaining access to critical resources. The defensive installations your group constructs are remarkable in their sophistication. Elevated platforms that provide visibility and refuge. Barrier systems that channel movement and provide cover. Early warning systems that detect approaching threats. Escape routes that allow rapid evacuation if defenses are breached. You're developing the architectural foundations for fortification and defensive engineering. But the real breakthrough lies in your approach to coordinated defense. Individual defensive preparations prove inadequate for the challenges of wetlands living. Instead, your group develops collective defense strategies that combine individual capabilities into integrated security systems. Different individuals serve specialized roles within the overall defensive plan. Sentries provide early warning. Fighters engage direct threats. Support personnel maintain escape routes and emergency supplies. These coordinated defense strategies require unprecedented levels of planning and communication. Each individual must understand not just their own defensive role, but how their actions contribute to overall group security. They must maintain readiness while continuing other survival activities. They must coordinate responses to threats that may develop rapidly and unpredictably. The medical challenges presented by wetlands living are unlike anything your species has previously encountered. The abundant water supports not just large game and diverse plant life, but also disease-carrying insects, parasitic organisms, and bacterial infections that don't exist in drier environments. Your group must develop new approaches to health maintenance and injury treatment that account for these novel threats. The health management strategies emerging from these challenges represent another cognitive breakthrough. You're not just treating injuries and illnesses after they occur anymore. You're learning to prevent health problems through environmental management and behavioral modification. Sleeping arrangements that reduce insect exposure, water treatment procedures that minimize infection risk, dietary practices that support immune system function. But perhaps most importantly, you're developing what modern medicine would recognize as epidemiological thinking. The ability to understand how diseases spread through populations and environments. You're learning to identify the environmental conditions that promote illness, the behavioral factors that increase susceptibility, and the preventive measures that reduce health risks. The plant medicine innovations emerging from wetlands living represent another leap forward in pharmaceutical knowledge. The diverse plant communities provide access to medicinal species that don't exist in other environments. But identifying, testing, and applying these plant medicines requires systematic investigation techniques that go far beyond traditional trial and error approaches. Your group's plant medicine specialists are developing what modern pharmacologists would recognize as systematic drug discovery protocols, approaches to identifying and testing potentially beneficial plant compounds, careful observation of animal behavior around different plant species, controlled testing of small quantities to assess effects and safety, documentation of preparation methods and dosage considerations. These pharmaceutical investigations require extraordinary attention to detail and systematic record-keeping abilities. You need to track which plants produce which effects under what conditions. You need to remember preparation techniques that may be used only occasionally. You need to share this information accurately with other group members and preserve it for future generations. As the sun climbs toward its zenith and your group prepares for another day of challenges and discoveries in this wetlands environment, you're carrying cognitive capabilities that represent millions of years of evolutionary development compressed into an extraordinarily brief time frame. The environmental pressures of this northern valley are accelerating your mental evolution at a pace that defies everything scientists thought they knew about the speed of cognitive change. The afternoon brings new lessons about resource management and environmental stewardship that will echo through millions of years of human development. Your group discovers that the wetlands aren't just a resource to be exploited, but a complex ecosystem that can be enhanced through intelligent management. The controlled burns you use for hunting also create habitat diversity that supports increased wildlife populations. The water management systems you construct for your own needs also benefit other species that share this environment. This ecological thinking represents a fundamental shift in your relationship with the natural world. You're learning to see yourself not as separate from the environment, but as part of an integrated system where your actions affect the health and productivity of the entire ecosystem. You're developing what modern ecologists would call systems thinking, the ability to understand complex relationships and predict the consequences of interventions. But more importantly, you're learning that environmental stewardship isn't just about conservation, it's about enhancement. Through intelligent management, you can increase the carrying capacity of natural systems while maintaining their long-term sustainability. You're developing the conceptual foundations for agriculture, forestry, and ecosystem management. The innovations in social organization emerging from wetlands living are equally profound. The abundance and complexity of resources support larger group sizes, but managing larger populations requires new forms of leadership, communication, and conflict resolution that transcend traditional dominance hierarchies. Your group begins developing what political scientists would eventually recognize as democratic decision-making processes, systems for making collective choices that incorporate input from multiple individuals while maintaining group cohesion and effectiveness. These processes aren't based on simple majority rule or autocratic authority. Instead, they reflect sophisticated understanding of how different types of expertise contribute to optimal outcomes. The communication innovations required for managing complex social organization represent another cognitive breakthrough. You're developing ways to convey not just immediate information, but abstract concepts about social relationships, resource allocation, and long-term planning. The vocalizations and gestures you use are becoming more standardized, more precise, and more capable of carrying complex meaning across different contexts. As evening approaches and your group gathers around the fire to process another day of unprecedented experiences, you're engaged in something that no other species in Earth's history has ever attempted. You're consciously directing your own evolutionary development through collective learning and strategic choice-making. The wetlands environment isn't just changing your bodies and brains, it's teaching you how to change yourselves. The stories shared around tonight's fire will become more than just information exchange. They're becoming the foundation of cumulative culture, the systematic preservation and transmission of knowledge that allows each generation to build upon the discoveries of their predecessors. You're creating the cognitive infrastructure that will eventually produce written language, formal education, and scientific institutions. Tomorrow will bring new challenges that will continue reshaping your species' cognitive architecture. But tonight, as you drift towards sleep in this rich and demanding environment, your dreams will be filled with possibilities that extend far beyond simple survival. You're dreaming of innovations that haven't been invented yet, of solutions to problems that haven't been encountered, of futures that stretch beyond the horizon of imagination. You're not just conquering the savannah anymore, you're becoming human. And the wetlands of the Northern Valley, with their abundance and complexity, their opportunities and dangers, are teaching you lessons about intelligence, cooperation, and environmental stewardship that will guide your species through millions of years of development toward the extraordinary moment you find yourself experiencing right now. As the stars emerge over that ancient wetland and the sounds of the Pliocene night begin their eternal symphony, we've witnessed something extraordinary. We've seen the birth of human consciousness itself, forged in the crucible of environmental challenge and shaped by the relentless demands of survival in a world that rewarded intelligence above all else. Those early hominids standing upright in the grasslands 5.2 million years ago weren't just our ancestors. They were the architects of everything we are today. Every time you solve a complex problem at work, you're using cognitive tools they developed while tracking prey across endless savannas. Every time you cooperate with others toward a common goal, you're employing social strategies they invented around flickering campfires. Every time you plan for the future, you're accessing mental capabilities they forged while making life or death decisions about which valley to call home. The savannah didn't just change their bodies, it created their minds, and in doing so, it created ours. The abstract thinking, the collaborative intelligence, the technological innovation, the environmental stewardship, all of it emerged from the fundamental challenge of thriving in a world that demanded more than any species had ever given before. And here's the remarkable thing. That same capacity for adaptation, for innovation, for conscious evolution lives on in you. The challenges you face today may be different, but the cognitive tools remain the same. The ability to think beyond the immediate moment, to cooperate across differences, to solve problems through collective intelligence, to consciously direct your own development through learning and choice. So tonight, when you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, remember those early hominids gathered around their fires in the Northern Valley, dreaming of possibilities they couldn't yet comprehend. Their dreams became your reality. And your dreams, who knows, they might just become the next chapter in this extraordinary story of human becoming. They might just become the next chapter in this extraordinary story of human becoming.